Hello, everyone. Welcome again to our podcast where we talk about AI and security. Today, we have an interesting guest. We have Walter. Walter, could you please introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on the show, George. So I'm Walter Haydock. I'm the founder of Stack Aware, and we help AI-powered companies measure and manage cybersecurity, compliance, and privacy risk.
So right into our alley. So interesting. We have tools for the AI, and you're helping us kind of create the governance and security and risk management around how we deal with the AI. So can you tell us a little bit more about how you started the company? What prompted you to do that?
So Stack Aware started out, believe it or not, actually as a vulnerability management company in the more on the software side of things. So I made a classic entrepreneur mistake my first time around by building a fully functional product that not really anyone was too interested in buying, and we still use some of the functionality internally, actually. But yeah, so when the ChatGPT craze started in late 2022, early 2023, I decided that I should shift the focus of the company, and we moved slightly in terms of subject matter, and then also moved more toward a services approach. So the goal is to work very closely with customers on a day-to-day basis, understand their challenges from a very granular perspective, and then develop playbooks, tools, and we are working on some software products to support them from a risk assessment perspective.
And that is all in the AI space, which means that I would assume that you're pretty versed with ISO 42001. This is the new AI risk management system that started, 2 years now? And recently, quite a few companies get accredited. So now we can start getting certifications. But what are your thoughts about ISO 42001?
ISO 42001 is the most broadly accepted standard for AI governance globally, and Stack Aware was an early leader in the space. We ourselves are certified under the standard. We achieved that at the end of 2024, and we've already helped other companies through the process to build an effective AI management system. So it is a high-level framework that gives you a set of tools to manage risk and do so in a way that is internationally accepted and repeatable across different companies.
How would you compare it to 27001? Because we're all familiar with 27001.
ISO 42001 and ISO 27001 are very similar in terms of structure. They have requirements for an information security and AI policy, respectively. They have requirements for internal audit programs. They have requirements for measurement and monitoring. They have an Annex A where they have specific technical controls that you can select from. Where they differ is the subject matter. So 27001 is focused squarely on information security risk. 42001, I would say, is a broader standard. It includes information security and privacy risk. That's part of it. But it also includes things like data provenance, data quality, and it also requires that you look outside the organization by doing AI system impact analyses to look on how they affect individuals and societies.
So in general, it sounds like it's the same structure, same approach. Like instead of information security management system, you have a AI management system, but seems to be a little bit more mature in terms of the approach.
Can you clarify it?
So because when you for example when we look at 27001, it's aside from the third party risk management portion of it, it's very much focused on the system, on the company. Whereas with 42001, you're also looking at what is the impact that the company has on the ecosystem outside. So now we're looking both ways.
Definitely. ISO 42001 is different than 27001 because it requires those system impact assessments. Although I will say that ISO in general has started mandating that all management system standards incorporate climate change into this,
Yes.
which is an interesting change for 27001, for 27701. Any management system out there will be impacted.
Yeah, that is interesting. So what do you see are the benefits of for it? Because there you can actually implement it without getting certified, or you can follow the principles of 42001, or you can go all the way and get a certification. Uh, what are the benefits that you see from implementing it and from getting certification?
Implementing ISO 42001 helps you build a repeatable system for managing AI use in your organization. It gives you a set of clear requirements for what you need to do, when you need to do them, and gives companies a basis for building their governance programs. Certification lets you prove to your customers, your regulators, or other stakeholders that you are, in fact, meeting the requirements of the standard rather than just saying that you are. You have a third party confirm that you are, and that gives people additional comfort. In the US, there's actually a law on the books, Colorado SB 205, that specifically calls out ISO 42001 and will give you safe harbor if you're otherwise in compliance under certain circumstances.
That is kind of interesting. Can you elaborate a little bit more?
Yeah, so in 2024, Colorado passed the Colorado Artificial Intelligence Act, which is roughly modeled on the European Union Artificial Intelligence Act. And it creates a category of what it calls high-risk AI systems. And it has a very comprehensive set of requirements with respect to impact assessments, risk assessments, building a risk management program on which you can base it on ISO 42001, the NIST AI risk management framework, or an other internationally accepted framework. But specifically, it calls out in certain circumstances, if you find out that you are in non-compliance through adversarial testing and you're otherwise following the requirements of ISO 42001 or the NIST AI RMF, then you could potentially use that as an affirmative defense.
That is really interesting. So yeah, I can see cases when getting a certification is actually cheaper than trying to defend against something. Yeah, in Colorado. But in US, it's starting because you mentioned Colorado, California. There was all this thing with California AI Act. Texas also had an AI Act. Where do you think that is going?
In the US, we're having a relatively fractured approach to AI governance. Earlier this summer, there was a proposal in the reconciliation bill, aka the One Big Beautiful Bill, to ban state-level AI regulation for 10 years. That was stripped out of the bill, did not pass. So now the states are going on their own to develop their own regimes. You mentioned Texas. I think they've taken a relatively light touch. I actually like the Texas approach. California's going the complete opposite direction, as you might expect.
Yeah.
They've passed 2 AI laws and 2 AI regulations just in the past year.
Yeah. Do you think we're going to see something like what happened with GDPR? When was that? Like 10 years ago, when the Europeans first started, and now the same thing is happening with the EU AI Act. And then we'll try to figure out, the rest of the world will try to figure out how to deal with AI, similarly how we are trying to figure out how to deal with privacy.
With respect to my European friends out there, I would potentially contest the premise of the question that Europe has figured out artificial intelligence governance. So to use some specific examples, the EU AI Act requires the use of a harmonized standard to give you a presumption of conformity under the act. So that is roughly equivalent to what I described with Colorado SB 205. That standard does not yet exist. And the EU AI Act is already live. Certain prohibited use cases are already under enforcement. And the high risk requirements of the EU AI Act come into effect in August of 2026. And as of the last report out of the technical committee, they are not planning to have that harmonized standard in place by August 2026.
So I see a repeat again of the GDPR when the law was out for, 7, 8 years before we actually got a standard of how to comply with the GDPR. So I guess the history repeats itself.
Indeed. And I think the approach for privacy that we've seen globally is a lot of companies just say, we're going to use GDPR as our standard. It's the lowest common denominator, or the highest common denominator, you might say. And we're just going to meet that requirement. I would say with AI, we might see a slightly different approach, and I'll give you a specific example. I was recently reviewing a HR tool for a customer, and this is actually in their public documentation. This HR tool said something about not using its AI functionality for candidates in the 5 boroughs of New York City. And that's because there's a law on the books, New York City Local Law 144, that requires a bias audit if you're using what's called an automated employment decision tool. And this company's just said, well, we could do the bias audit, or we could just not turn on the functionality for anybody in New York. So we are seeing a little bit of a fracturing on the implementation side as well as the regulatory side.
That actually opens the door for a lot of problems, because how do you know who is in New York and where do you use it, and all those kind of, like with everything else, lack of standardization, uniformity is a problem. Okay. Do you think, because 42001 was developed relatively, everything in the AI right now is happening really fast, and one can make an argument that 42001 is maybe becoming long on the tooth. Do you think we're going to see another revision anytime soon?
We definitely should have a revision of ISO 42001 sooner than 9 years after its publication, which is the revision cycle we've seen for a lot of other standards.
Right. Where do you see the areas that kind of are most in need of review?
With ISO 42001, as I said, it's a high-level standard. In some cases, I think it's a little bit too high level. And what I have been helping a lot of clients with is picking apart the requirements and translating them into a implementable approach. I'll give you an example. So data provenance. If you are not training or fine-tuning any AI models, you might not necessarily know anything about the data provenance,
right,
for the underlying information that was used to train them. So the standard doesn't really say anything about how you should treat that type of situation. One of the controls is data provenance. You need to track the data provenance. So how Stack Aware advises our clients and how we do it is we say, we develop a standard for certain use cases. And if a given system drops below that standard, so for example, if it's a high-risk use case, we need to have some information on the underlying quality, on the inherent bias of the information. If it drops below that standard, then we track that as a risk in a register that we need to accept, avoid, mitigate, or transfer. Yeah. So that's how we deal with it. But I'd love to see more clear guidance on the correct approach.
It's interesting you picked that example, because that is actually majority of the companies in the AI space. In fact, very few companies are training and producing models. Most of us are using contextualizing, prompt engineering around those models. So it's almost like, maybe we should think about the other area, which is the SBOM, and kind of have AI added to the SBOM so that we can get some data, and then we have an SLA with the supplier of the AI model and all that stuff.
Interesting that you mentioned software bills of material. Stack Aware, we publish our software bill of material publicly, and we make that available to anyone who wants to check it out. They can see all of our subprocessors. And I think that format, although it is certainly not a lightweight format, specifically the Cyclone DX format, it is a very powerful tool that lets you answer a lot of questions about a piece of software, and it provides guidelines for how you should communicate about important things about an information system, about an AI model. So I think that is going to be the approach going forward. We're several years away from that.
What are your thoughts on benchmarking, especially in the security space? Because now we have quite a few benchmarking around the core models, the AI models that are coming out. But how do we approach benchmarking of the derivatives, not of the models, but software that is built on top of the models? Like people who, let's say, the companies that have calls against OpenAI or Anthropic, or they use their LLM model, but they build on top of it and they offer services, because that is really exploding at the moment. So how should we think about comparing those two? Like how do I know that the system from company A that solves my problem is better than the system from company B that solves the same problem? And better is I don't know, that's kind of a loaded term, because it's not just how fast it is and how accurate and how many false positive. It's really a loaded term. But what do you think about benchmarking? Where do you think that is going?
The key to evaluating AI system performance is understanding what your business requirements are. So you can look at confidentiality, integrity, and availability from a security lens, but you can also look at it from a business lens. So if you have a tool that needs to produce funny limericks, integrity and confidentiality don't really matter. In fact, you might get some funny outputs if your integrity goes down. Now, conversely, if you're running a healthcare chatbot, then your requirements for confidentiality and integrity are pretty high. You actually would want to sacrifice availability if you had to, sacrifice anything, because you don't want a chatbot that is giving incorrect responses or leaking sensitive data. So the key to developing effective benchmarks is understanding the business requirements, and then subsequent to that, developing a way to track performance over time within a bound of requirements. So you can't expect the chatbot to respond 100% correctly every time, but you might say, okay, we can accept it responding 95% of the time correctly, or less or more, depending on your use case.
Yeah. So that's kind of the classic approach for implementing some kind of a benchmarking and KPIs, those kind of things. So I guess your premise is that this classic approach is going to work at AI. We should not try to reinvent the wheel.
I would say that it's even more important with non-deterministic systems to have ranges of performance, because if you have a purely rules-based approach, you should expect it to output at least the same data every time. Maybe performance could vary over time, but the actual output itself should never change. And if it does, then something's gone wrong. But with AI, that's not going to happen. So we need to have a range of acceptable outputs.
Okay, so some fuzziness around the expectations. So long as semantically is the same, then we should be okay. Interesting. So going back to the EU AI Act, because a lot of companies are kind of looking at how to build governance around AI. I mean, that's the starting point. Even before you start thinking about 42001 or security around AI, the first thing that you should think about is the governance around AI. And both EU Act and 42001, I heard a lot of companies actually using that as a starting point of how to build governance. So do you have any kind of tips and tricks and advice how to approach building the governance around AI?
If you're building an AI governance program, I would recommend using ISO 42001 as the basis for it, rather than a specific law or regulation, and here's why. ISO 42001 gives you a system for complying with regulatory requirements, whereas the EU AI Act is a regulatory requirement itself. And if your only goal is to avoid enforcement action under the EU AI Act, and you build your program 100% around that law, then that should work. However, if you want to expand into another jurisdiction, if different countries start passing their own requirements that you're already operating in, it's difficult to turn the ship, so to speak, of AI governance quickly, unless you have a flexible system for doing so. So that is why I recommend using 42001 as the basis for AI governance, rather than a specific statute.
Okay. So how one should approach building that governance?
The first actionable clause of ISO 42001 is focused on the organization and its context. So understanding what are the regulatory issues, what are the business drivers, what are the internal cultural and organizational approaches to getting things done. These are all important things to consider at the outset of any AI governance program development. Once you do that, then you can build a policy and develop a approach for risk management. But understanding the issues that are applicable, and I'd say primarily from a business perspective, that will be the most important step of your AI governance program.
So even like going around and creating a catalog of potential use cases, just to figure out how far you want to push and where is the appetite for the risk around AI, and then taking those use cases and use them as a basis for the development of the policies.
You should definitely know what you want to do with AI before you start trying to build a governance program, because there are a lot of situations where I talk to folks and say, well, the best time to get me involved is as early as possible. The only exception to that would be is if you don't know what you're trying to accomplish, because that's not my job. That's your job. And once you tell me what you're trying to accomplish, then I can tell you how to do it in a secure, compliant, and privacy-preserving way.
Yeah. And that is extremely important, especially around the AI. And if I can bring the security component here, because very often when we talk to people about AI, the perception is tools like ChatGPT or Gemini or Anthropic or Copilot. However, AI is much more than that. It's not just the LLM, not only the large language models, but also there are other different models that can be used for a lot of things. And actually, we see that happening in the security space nowadays. A lot of tools are coming up that have nothing to do with LLM. They help us kind of advance the business of security through different types of AI. So I guess if one thing I would like to highlight is that when we think about those use cases, don't limit ourselves only to the LLM related use cases.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about what your company does and how do you approach the problem. Have you seen any tooling that helps you in the evaluation and implementation of 42001?
42001 is a relatively new standard, so we've seen the compliance automation platform start rolling out support for it. I'll actually say that one of StackAware's public customers is itself a GRC tool. Scrut Automation, we helped get them certified in early 2025. So we're seeing this come out across the board. I think a comprehensive approach to governance up front is important before you go into tool selection. Once you've done that, once you've built that governance program, and especially as part of the Annex A control implementation, that's when I advise bringing to bear technical tools, whether they be conversational AI, evaluation tools, performance testing tools, whether they're shadow AI detection tools, even prompt blocking tools. So once you have the governance program in place, which ISO 42001 gives you a good framework for, then you can start applying technical controls in the form of specific security tools.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Have you seen anything in the GRC space?
Yep. I've seen plenty of tools in the GRC space that are helping with ISO 42001 implementation. StackAware is one of them. We're not a GRC platform and we don't compete with them. We work with them. In fact, what we do is we provide risk assessment data to our customers, whether it's via API, whether it's integration with the GRC platform. And we also provide pre-built model system and impact assessments to streamline the process. If you're rolling out a new tool and you want to understand, what are the conceivable societal impacts of doing this, the privacy, individual, life situation type impacts, you could pull from a library of those things. So that's something we do. On the GRC side, I've seen tools that will build a comprehensive risk register for you. I'm still seeing a lot of limitations in terms of quantitative risk assessment, which is something that Stack Aware is a big proponent of and that we do for many of our clients. So that's something I'd love to see, but a lot of the blocking and tackling is there in the GRC space.
Do you see companies starting to use more formalized risk register? Like, for example, what MIT published, when was that, like a year ago, with the comprehensive AI risks? So have you seen any of those? What other tools have you seen in terms of risk assessment?
The MIT database is extremely comprehensive. I will say to the point of being overwhelming.
Maybe too much, yes.
In some cases, in my opinion, I'd say it's a little bit duplicative. There are a lot of overlapping risks in there. There are over 1,000. So
yeah,
having an actionable way to deploy that is really important. And that's where we come in and we help organizations do that. So yeah, the MIT risk register is definitely something that is useful. The AI control matrix from the Cloud Security Alliance is definitely something that I've seen as being useful. Also, the other ISO standards, for example, ISO 23984, I think I got that right, is for AI risk management. That's a non-certifiable standard, but it is a reference. It is a informative reference for ISO 42001. And then ISO 5338 on AI system life cycles is also useful.
Okay. What do you think about the research that is happening in the UC Berkeley with the Bayer Group? Are you familiar with that one? Yeah, they are trying to come up with, again, governing principles, but slightly from a different angle. And I think very soon they'll be publishing also risk, if they haven't already, published the risk register. So I would expect a lot to kind of align with what MIT published. So I think at some point we'll start converging around a common theme here. Then NIST is also doing some development around the AI. Do you expect anything significant to come anytime soon there?
NIST released the AI risk management framework in January of 2023. And then very recently, the Trump administration released the AI action plan, which directs some, I would say, moderately substantive changes to the NIST AI RMF, removing what the Trump administration calls politicized aspects of it. And, some would say that it was politicized to begin with. So, yeah, that's those are the types of steps we're seeing. The NIST AI RMF, I think, has the potential to be a useful standard. And, it does have some interesting guidance. It helps you identify some key risks. I have had some criticisms of it as well. So I would be very interested to see what version 1.1 looks like. And we've seen with the cybersecurity framework evolution over time. So
yes,
I expect the same.
Yeah. Awesome. So at the end, where do you see us, let's say, I wouldn't say 5 years because things are happening so quickly now. Where do you see us in 2-3 years?
In 2 to 3 years, we're going to see AI governance become less of a new cool thing and more of a just thing that we do as part of business operations, just like cybersecurity, I think, has become part of doing business. Basically, every company, whether it's a grocery store or a software company, has some sort of cybersecurity team or focus. We're going to see that with AI governance as well. Which functional departments are going to own it internally? I think that's open for debate. We've seen the security teams own it mainly because it looks and feels a lot like security. I've seen privacy teams own it. I've seen legal teams own it. I've even seen dedicated AI governance teams, which I think is an interesting concept. So I think we're going to see the evolution of the craft, the practice of AI governance over the next 2 years. And it's going to become, just like every company is basically a cloud company right now, every company is going to become an AI company.
AI company, yeah. We actually talked earlier about OpenAI coming up with their own browser. What could possibly go wrong there? And even today, I think they announced the ability to contextualize the agent with the company data. So those are really bold steps, and kind of they're getting into the business side of the house. And if that's any indication, I would expect more and more announcements along those lines from OpenAI, and probably the others as well. I mean, the others will catch up as well. So yeah, we're going to have a lot of AI tools all over us. Yeah,
Absolutely.
better figure out the governance first, because that's kind of the starting point. Thank you so much, Walter. This was interesting. A lot of insights around AI governance, which definitely is related to AI security, and some good starting points how to think about AI governance. Thank you so much. Any closing thoughts?
No, appreciate the time and the invitation, George, and look forward to seeing the work that you all do when it comes to AI governance and security.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, George.